Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Joining me are Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford and our Budget Secretary David Brinkley. Tomorrow morning, we will be hosting the House Speaker, the Senate President, and all of the legislative fiscal leaders of both parties at Government House for breakfast and a fiscal summit meeting as we officially submit our FY 2019 budget. Our administration has pledged to bring fiscal restraint to Annapolis and to hold the line on spending, and for nearly 3 years we have. We vowed to fund priorities like education, transportation, health care, and the environment, and we have done exactly what we said we would do. The FY 2019 budget that we will submit tomorrow successfully slows the rate of growth while still funding our priorities. Once again, we will provide historically high record funding for K through 12 education, our fourth consecutive budget to do so. This is the most money ever spent on education in the history of our state. This budget achieves our goal of fully funding program open space for the first time in more than a decade. It ensures that Maryland's most vulnerable citizens have access to critical health care services. This budget again limits tuition growth to 2% at Maryland's universities, colleges, and community colleges. Our FY 2019 budget will again maintain nearly $1 billion in cash reserves. Our budget accomplishes all of this without resorting to gimmicks, without raising taxes, without cutting services, and without raiding dedicated special funds, as had been the practice in the past. And for the fourth straight year, our budget is 100% structurally balanced. Just 3 years ago, our administration inherited a $5.1 billion structural deficit. The day after I was sworn in, we submitted the first structurally balanced budget in a decade, and we eliminated nearly all of the $5.1 billion structural deficit which we inherited. We did this without eliminating agencies, departments, or services, without layoffs or furloughs, and while providing record funding for education. With our second budget, we continued to stress fiscal restraint. We worked together with members of the legislature to pass our budget in both houses with very little disagreement or debate, and we were able to achieve $1 billion in the rainy day fund and preserve an additional $440 million cash surplus. Last year, we submitted a budget that actually decreased general fund spending in real dollars while still funding all of our priorities. We have now completed 4 budgets in a row with no new taxes, and we have actually cut taxes 3 years in a row by more than $700 million. As a direct result of our fiscal discipline, belt-tightening, and business-friendly policies, our state has had one of the best economic turnarounds in the nation. We had the best year for business in Maryland in 15 years. We had the best year for job growth in a decade. We went from losing 100,000 jobs to gaining more than 130,000 jobs, and we lowered our unemployment rate to 3.9%. We've had the fastest job growth in the Mid-Atlantic region, and we're doing better than most of the other states in the country. Because of the fiscal restraint that we have instituted for the past 3 years, we are in much better shape today than we otherwise would have been. We knew that cleaning up the financial mess that we inherited would continue to require tough decisions and a multi-year effort, even with the economic resurgence that we have experienced. Unfortunately, due to forced increases in spending by the legislature, state spending is once again growing faster than our revenues are. Our economy is growing, and state revenue is projected to increase by more than $3 billion over the next 5 years. But over that same period, legislatively mandated spending is expected to increase by an additional $4.5 billion. Our administration has repeatedly cautioned the legislature against these unsustainable forced increases in spending, which now accounts for 84% of the state's budget, and which have put our budget on autopilot for even more spending increases that we simply can't afford. Let me just repeat that again, because I want to make sure you got it. Currently, and there's a chart here somewhere that shows that, one with the dollar bill on it, currently 84 cents out of every single dollar is mandated spending by the legislature, leaving our administration only the 16 cents to do all of our budget planning, belt tightening, and reining in of spending. It is just common sense, and all Marylanders understand that you simply can't keep spending more money than you're taking in. Last year, not only did the legislature ignore our warnings about the need to stop mandated spending increases, instead, they actually proposed a staggering $2.8 billion in new forced spending increases in just the short 90 days that they were here in Annapolis. Fortunately, we were able to stop 85% of that from actually happening. But in spite of our best efforts, they were still able to ram through another $418 million in new mandatory spending increases. So once again, our administration will introduce legislation to control these forced spending increases which exceed revenues. We're hopeful that this year members of the legislature will finally put aside the failed tax and spend policies of the past and instead work together with us to permanently put Maryland's fiscal house in order. Now let me go into a few of the specifics of our 2019 budget. As I mentioned, for the fourth year in a row, we will provide historic, unprecedented levels of education funding. In this budget, we put a record $6.5 billion into K-12 education, which is above and beyond the spending formulas proposed by the legislature. Let me make this very clear. Not only will every single penny that every single jurisdiction anticipates from the state for education be fully funded at 100%, but in addition, every single school system in Maryland will see increased investment by the state. Our budget includes an additional $140 million in direct aid, $15.2 million over and above the legislature's formulas in direct aid to schools. And we are investing an additional $365 million more in school construction funding, which is the biggest investment in school construction in a decade. This brings our administration's new investments in school construction to $1.4 billion. Our budget will provide $1.38 billion to the University of Maryland, which also represents an increase over last year. Community colleges, again, are fully funded in our budget. In fact, we're providing them $261 million, which is also a record, the most ever invested in our community colleges. Our budget includes $10 million dedicated funding dedicated to increasing the number of graduates in STEM-related fields. We have $3 million for the innovative Smart Buy program, which helps families afford to become homeowners and helps them pay off their student loan debt. And we again provided additional investment in order to limit the tuition growth at our universities and colleges and community colleges to no more than 2%. Nearly 3/4 of our entire capital budget goes towards education. To keep adding jobs, growing our economy, and educating our workforce, our budget includes $10 million for two new tax credits established under the More Jobs for Marylanders Act, and an additional $6 million for our recently announced More Jobs for Marylanders Act 2.0 to expand this program and to target further job creation. We're including $8 million for the very successful EARN program. EARN stands for Employment Advancement Right Now. It's our nationally recognized job training and Workforce Development Program. $5 million for computer science workforce initiatives to increase job readiness and diversity in this industry sector. Our budget dedicates another $13 million to combat the heroin and opioid crisis. To continue to safeguard Maryland's environment for the next generation, our budget provides nearly $53 million to fully fund the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund for the third straight year, and $6 million for the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. We include $2 million to provide statewide access to high-speed internet. In public safety, we're investing $7 million to recruit and retain correctional officers at our state facilities, more than $8 million to upgrade and replace the aging fleet of Maryland State Police vehicles, $2 million for our new Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network to fulfill our commitment to restore highway user revenues. Our fiscal 2019 budget dedicates more than $230 million to local governments for infrastructure improvements. The previous administration had cut highway user revenues by 90%, which had a devastating impact on local road improvements and on county and municipal budgets. We will once again urge the legislature to work with us to restore this much-needed funding for local governments. For the fourth straight year, we are holding the capital debt limit line at $995 million, which, if maintained for the next 5 years, will save our state $740 million in interest and principal payments on our debt over the next 15 years. We will invest another $25 million for our very successful Project Core so that we can continue our work for blight removal in Baltimore City. And we provide funding for the revitalization of communities all across the state, including Hagerstown, Cumberland, Salisbury, and Columbia. For the past 2 years, the budgets submitted by our administration have included money for the Fair Campaign Finance Fund. As you may know, I'm the only person in state history to ever be elected governor by using public financing. In 2017, we proposed $1.8 million to restore this fund, and we put it in our budget. The legislature cut $800,000 of it and moved it someplace else. In 2018, our budget included another $1 million needed for the fund, and the legislature completely removed all of that funding. We want to include money to restore this Fair Campaign Finance Fund, but this time we learned our lesson. We're going to see if the legislature stops playing games with this important funding before we agree to add it to the budget. So we'll reach an agreement with them, hopefully, and submit a supplemental budget to fix that. Interestingly, I think there's somebody that's talking about using that fund that voted against the funding. Just as a side item. Finally, our 2019 budget includes tax relief for middle-class taxpayers, retirees, and small businesses. We will also submit legislation to protect Marylanders from potential negative impacts of federal tax reform on Maryland taxes. We expect to receive an analysis from Comptroller Francho in the next few weeks to determine exactly how Marylanders will be affected. However, it is very clear that due to the loss of several long-standing federal tax deductions and exemptions, that Maryland state revenue will likely increase by up to $1 billion. Our legislation will be designed to protect Maryland taxpayers and hold them harmless from any negative effects of the federal tax bill on state taxes. Our goal will be to leave all of that money in the pockets of hardworking Marylanders. This will prevent up to a $1 billion tax hike on Marylanders. I made this announcement on December 20th, and we've been working very hard for the past month. And today I'm very excited because I understand that we now may have actually convinced the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House to get on board with our proposal. An overwhelming majority of Marylanders support our fiscal efforts and our effort to hold the line on taxes and unsustainable spending. Over the next few days, as they do every year, members of the legislature, I'm sure, will find things in our budget that they don't agree with, or something that they feel is missing or that should be increased. Our proposal is simply the first step. The legislature will now have the next 84 days to review our proposals, to debate the details, and to make whatever changes they feel are necessary. And we are eager for them to begin that process. My hope is that they will roll up their sleeves, sharpen their pencils, and that we can work together in a common sense, bipartisan manner to rein in spending and to finally figure out how to live within our means. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.